Welcome to the Phil and H Travel Podcast. Is it worth it? Today we're doing a deep dive into a destination that is, well, it's honestly a bit of a paradox.
Oh, 100%. It's totally wild.
Right, because I want you to imagine standing just like 3 meters away from a churning, explosive lake of actual lava. Like you can feel the subsonic boom of the earth literally rattling your ribs.
Just molten rocks shooting into the night sky. I mean, it's an incredible image.
It really is. But then, and this is the crazy part, imagine waking up the next morning, driving back into the capital city, and the picturesque waterfront promenade from the brochures is just heavily scarred.
Yeah, like the luxury dining room of your hotel is a literal construction zone being rebuilt from the ground up.
Exactly. And that's the tension at the heart of our sources today. We are unpacking the 2026 reality of Vanuatu. It's this 83-island Melanesian archipelago out in the South Pacific, and it's experiencing this massive collision between mind-bending natural wonder and the really gritty reality of a post-earthquake rebuild.
It's a fascinating set of source material today. I mean, usually when you research a destination, you get the tourism board's highlight reel,
Oh yeah, the heavily curated sunset-filtered stuff.
Right, the totally frictionless version of a place. But the documents and the data we're diving into today act much more like a contractor's inspection report for a holiday destination.
I love that analogy, a contractor's report.
Yeah, because we're looking at the beautiful bones of the place, absolutely, but we're also stripping away the spin. We're looking at the structural realities, the literal costs down to the local currency, the infrastructure gaps, and what it actually takes to navigate the archipelago right now.
Because it's a rebuild. It's not just a reopening.
Exactly. It's a fundamental rebuild.
And that contractor's report approach is exactly why we're doing this deep dive. If you're listening to this right now, maybe you're plotting your next big trip, looking at the Pacific, weighing your options. Our mission today is to give you the completely unvarnished intelligence you need to decide if 2026 Vanuatu is your dream adventure.
Or a total logistical nightmare.
Right. But before we even touch on hotels or flights, we really need to understand how rare and complex this country actually is.
Yeah.
Because, look, this is not just some generic strip of white sand.
No, far from it. To ground us in the reality of the place, you have to look at the demographics first. We're talking about a population of roughly 330,000 people.
Which is pretty small, honestly.
Very small. And they're spread across 65 inhabited islands. But here is the really staggering data point. Within that tiny population, there are over 130 distinct active languages spoken.
Wait, let's just pause on that for a second.
Yeah.
Over 130 distinct languages for a population the size of, like, a medium-sized American city.
Yeah, it's mathematically incredible.
That is wild. You could literally drive across a single island, cross a mountain ridge, drop down into a new village, and they're speaking an entirely different language than the one you just left an hour ago.
Exactly. The geography of these volcanic islands naturally isolates communities, and that has preserved one of the most culturally dense environments on Earth.
Which is amazing. But why does that matter to you, the traveler, specifically in 2026?
Well, it matters because of the economic inflection point the country is sitting on right now. Their tourism sector is projected to see a massive 3.9% GDP growth this year.
Wow, that's huge.
It is. It's the fastest growth they've seen since 2017. So the core question for you is, why should you care? Because if your idea of a perfect vacation is a totally sterilized, engineered resort bubble where you never leave the lounge chair.
Or every single variable.
Right, exactly. Then Vanuatu might not be for you right now. But if you want authentic Pacific culture, genuine adventure, and you want to actively participate in a country rebuilding itself, understanding these logistics is the master key.
Okay, so let's unpack the geographical layout. Because setting the physical stage is really the first step in our inspection report.
Yeah, you have to understand the post-earthquake landscape before you look at timelines and budgets.
For sure. And our sources point out a massive misconception right out of the gate. They literally call it the main trap.
Oh, the assumption that Port Vila is Vanuatu.
Yes. It's such a classic geographical trap. Port Vila is the capital city. It's on the island of Ifate, and it's where the international airport is. But Port Vila is the absolute epicenter of the rebuild zone.
It really is.
The untouched paradise, those deep traditional villages, the pristine dive sites that you probably have in your mind's eye. Those are out on the outer islands, places like Tanna, Espiritu Santo, Pentecost.
Right. Assuming Port Vila represents the whole country is, well, it's like assuming Times Square represents the entirety of New York State.
That's a perfect way to put it.
It's a vital distinction because it dictates how the recovery is actually happening. I mean, we have to address the December 2024 earthquake. It was a genuine tragedy.
Yeah, 14 lives lost.
Right. Which is devastating for such a tight-knit nation. But structurally speaking, it wrecked Port Vila's port and severely damaged the main commercial arteries.
And the port is like the absolute beating heart of their tourism and supply chain, right?
Exactly. It's how everything gets in. It also caused massive damage to major resort properties. So when you land at Bowerfield International Airport in Port Vila, you are essentially landing in the triage center of the nation's economy.
Okay, wait, hold on. I need to push back on this a bit because our sources also highlight a report from the Vanuatu Tourism Office. And they state that by early 2026, 90% of hotels have reopened.
Yeah, that number is out there.
So if Port Vila is the triage center and the infrastructure took a hit that severe, how is 90% even mathematically or physically possible? Like, are these places fully operational, or are they just throwing beds into half-finished construction zones and calling themselves open?
That is exactly the right question to ask, and the answer is that the word reopened carries a lot of heavy lifting here.
I figured.
The resilience of the local industry is incredible, no doubt about it, but it is heavily, heavily phased. Some premium spots, like the Havana Resort, were able to bounce back fully. They're welcoming guests at a really high standard.
Okay, so the luxury end is somewhat insulated.
Right. But for many larger footprint properties, open means, you have a bed and a functioning bathroom, but the amenities are severely compromised. Take the Holiday Inn complex, for example.
What's going on there?
Well, our sources note they are absolutely taking guests, but their leisure facilities and main dining rooms are still being phased in through the middle of 2026.
Oh, wow. So you are staying in a property that is literally under construction.
Yes. You might be waking up to the sound of power tools instead of just ocean waves.
That's a huge caveat.
Yeah.
Which actually leads to an even bigger logistical mystery to me. Usually when a destination takes a massive infrastructural hit and the hotels are still pouring concrete, the international airlines pull back, right? They reduce capacity.
That's the standard industry playbook, yeah.
But the data here shows the exact opposite. The airlines are flooding the zone.
They're doubling down in a massive way. The flight connectivity boom we're seeing in 2026 is totally unprecedented for the region.
Let me just run through the list our sources provided, because the sheer volume of planes pointing toward Vanuatu right now is kind of staggering.
Go for it.
Okay, so Qantas took their Brisbane to Port Vila route and just pumped it up to a daily service running from March all the way through late October.
A daily flight is a huge commitment.
Massive. Then Solomon Airlines jumped in, adding twice-weekly flights from Brisbane straight into Espiritu Santo, like completely bypassing the capital.
Which is a really smart move, honestly.
Very smart. Then Jetstar is running direct flights out of Sydney, starting at an incredibly aggressive $484 return.
Under $500. That's crazy.
And if you're coming from New Zealand, Fiji Airways is running Auckland to Port Vila in just 3 hours and 15 minutes.
And we should probably note for the North American listeners, the typical route usually involves connecting through Nadi in Fiji, which is currently pricing out around $605 return from the hub.
Which is surprisingly accessible, honestly.
Very much so.
But why? Why are the airlines doing this when the hotels are clearly still rebuilding?
Because the airlines have recognized a massive demographic shift in traveler appetite, they're looking at the exact same data our sources are looking at.
Which shows what exactly?
It shows an 18% rise in Australian arrivals from January to November 2025 compared to the previous year.
Wow, an 18% bump right after an earthquake.
Yeah. After years of generic sanitized travel, there is this surging pent-up demand for authentic, slightly rugged Pacific experiences. The airlines see the demand, so they are flooding the zone with capacity.
But that has to create a massive secondary friction point, right?
Oh, absolutely. Think of it like plugging a high-pressure fire hose of tourist dollars and physical bodies into a fragile, repairing garden hose of local infrastructure.
That is such a vivid image. The pressure is just going to cause the seams to burst.
Exactly. The pipelines bringing people in are completely full, but the literal and figurative plumbing on the ground is still actively being repaired.
Which perfectly transitions us from the where to the when. Because if you are flying into a country where the infrastructure is under that kind of extreme pressure, Your timing dictates absolutely everything.
It dictates your budget, your overall experience, and frankly, your physical safety.
For sure. Our sources basically split the calendar into 4 distinct windows, but it all revolves around 2 true seasons.
Right. And timing is arguably the single most critical variable a listener needs to get right. Let's break down the mechanics, starting with the dry season, which runs from May to October.
The dry season is the golden window. The ocean temperature sits at this incredible 25 to 27 degrees Celsius. That's roughly 77 to 80 degrees Fahrenheit for the Americans.
Perfect swimming weather.
Absolutely perfect. The humidity drops, the skies clear up, and you get these beautiful, steady trade winds. But inside that 6-month window, you have a massive pressure cooker.
The peak season.
Yes, the peak season of July and August.
And that peak is driven almost entirely by institutional calendars, specifically the Australian and New Zealand school holidays.
Right, because it's so close for them.
Exactly. During July and August, those daily Qantas seats become incredibly scarce. And the hotels in Port Vila that are actually fully functional, they'll easily hit 85 to 90% occupancy.
So you're basically paying a huge premium just to compete with families.
Pretty much.
Then you have the flip side, the wet season. That runs from November to April. The heat spikes, the humidity gets honestly oppressive, and you get these intense tropical rain bursts. But the real issue is the severe cyclone risk, which peaks from January to March.
Yeah, the cyclone risk is no joke.
And this brings me to a huge point of confusion. If the cyclone risk is genuinely that high, and the infrastructure is already fragile from the earthquake, why on earth do airlines even sell cheap tickets during those months?
That's our question.
Like, why not just suspend the routes and protect the travelers?
It all comes down to the ruthless mechanics of fixed cost economics. I mean, think about a massive resort in Port Vila or an airline operating a Boeing 737. They have enormous fixed overhead.
Right. The planes don't just disappear in February.
Exactly. And the local resort staff still need their wages to feed their families. They require a baseline of cash flow just to keep the lights on and the supply chains active.
So they basically heavily discount the inventory to lure people in.
They slash room rates, they drop airfares, all to attract a very specific type of traveler. The high-risk, high-reward bargain hunter.
The person who is willing to roll the dice with the weather to save, like, $500.
Precisely, but the logistics guide is very, very clear on this. If you are that traveler and you book between November and April, you cannot just set it and forget it.
What do they have to do?
Every serious planner must obsessively monitor the Vanuatu Meteorology Cyclone Tracker from mid-December onwards. It is not a suggestion. It is a mandatory part of the pre-trip process.
Okay, so let me get this straight. If the peak dry season is an overcrowded, expensive pressure cooker, and the wet season requires you to essentially become an amateur meteorologist to avoid a literal cyclone.
Where is the sweet spot?
Yeah. How do you hack the calendar?
Well, the sources identify a highly specific value window. This is the shoulder dry season. We are looking at the month of May, right as the rains stop, but before the school holidays begin. And then that second pocket from late September into early November.
Let's talk about the mechanics of why that value window actually works.
During those shoulder months, you see a massive drop in demand. Accommodation prices drop by roughly 25% compared to the August peak.
A quarter off the price is significant.
It really is. The cruise ship frequency dips slightly too. And crucially, if your goal is to head out to the island of Tanna to see the active volcano, the prevailing winds during these shoulder months often provide near-perfect viewing conditions.
Really? How does the wind affect it?
It blows the ash away from the crater rim access points, so your visibility is clear and you aren't breathing in as much sulfur.
Oh, that makes total sense.
Yeah.
But weather isn't the only thing that drives crowds, right? This is where it gets really fascinating to me. Vanuatu has these deeply rooted, spectacular cultural festivals that act as massive gravity wells for specialized travel.
Oh, the cultural flashpoints.
Yes, you have Independence Day on July 30th, which effectively turns the entire nation into a giant, vibrant street party.
The energy is incredible then.
But then you have these hyper-local events.
Like the Toka Festival on Tanna?
Yes. The Toka Festival only happens every 3 years, usually in August. It is a massive alliance-building ceremony between different tribes. We're talking days of feasting, dancing, and gift exchanging. It's a huge deal. Or the Naugol on Pentecost Island.
The land diving.
Exactly. It's basically the original bungee jumping, where local men dive from massive, handmade wooden towers with just vines tied to their ankles. That runs from April to June.
And our sources point out a really critical logistical detail here. If your trip overlaps with these flashpoints, you're not just competing with international tourists.
Right, because locals travel for this too.
Exactly. You're competing with a massive surge of domestic travel. Locals are moving between islands to attend these events. Flights book out entirely. Guest houses overflow. You essentially have to book these specific windows almost a year in advance.
And speaking of massive surges of people, we absolutely cannot discuss timing without discussing the heaviest, most disruptive infrastructural footprint of all.
The cruise ships.
Oh man, the cruise ship phenomenon.
The numbers in the report are just staggering. 125 cruise ships are expected to dock in early 2026 alone.
125 floating cities.
Literally. When one of these massive ships docks in Port Vila Harbor, which typically happens, 2 to 4 days a week during the peak season, the entire dynamic of the capital changes instantly.
How bad does it get?
Well, you have a sleepy, recovering Pacific town that suddenly has 3,000 to 4,000 people dumped onto its main street. Downtown goes to absolute shoulder-to-shoulder gridlock inside of 2 hours.
It's the fire hose and the garden hose again.
Exactly that.
So here is a crucial pro tip straight from the inspection report for you. On cruise ship days, you must aggressively avoid downtown Port Vila. Avoid Mama's Market, avoid Independence Park. Do not try to stroll down the waterfront and buy a souvenir when 4,000 day trippers are trying to do the exact same thing in a 4-hour window. Your strategy has to be flowing in the exact opposite direction of the cruise tenders.
Get out of town.
Yes, go to a blue hole, go to an outer island, leave the capital to the ships.
It is genuinely the only way to maintain your sanity and your budget, actually, which we will get into later when we talked about how prices magically inflate when the ships are in port.
Right, the pricing traps. We'll definitely cover that. But okay, so we've mapped the geography, and we know exactly when to pull the trigger on booking. I want to transition to the actual physical experience of getting there.
The arrival arc.
Yeah, let's walk through the 24-hour psychological arc of arrival. Because the source material doesn't just give us the dry logistics of immigration. It paints a wildly vivid sensory picture of what it feels like the moment your boots hit the tarmac at Bowerfield Airport.
The arrival in Vanuatu is a full sensory assault. It is highly, highly distinct.
It really is. Like you walk down the stairs off the plane, and the first thing that hits your brain is the smell. It is this intense, complex collision of sweet, blooming frangipani flowers cutting straight through the sharp, industrial scent of aviation diesel.
That mix of nature and machinery right away.
And then the noise just washes over you. You hear the staccato shouts of Bislama, which is the local English Melanesian Creole, echoing between the baggage handlers and taxi drivers.
It's a very rhythmic language.
Very. And right behind that human noise is the deafening mechanical drone of tropical cicadas in the trees. And then finally, the physical feeling. The sources describe the humidity hitting you like a warm towel.
And that warm towel sensation isn't just poetic, it's an actual physiological mechanism. Your body is instantly trying to thermoregulate to a true equatorial marine climate.
It takes a second to adjust.
It does. But while your nervous system is adjusting to the heat, the actual logistical entry is surprisingly frictionless.
Which is a relief.
Huge relief. If you are a citizen of the US, the UK, Australia, or New Zealand, and your passport is valid for at least 6 months, immigration is super fast. You get 30 days visa-free on arrival, no massive paperwork headaches.
So you grab your bag, you walk outside, and you grab a taxi. It's going to cost you about 1,500 Vanuatu Vatu, which translates to roughly $12 for the 20-minute ride into downtown Port Vila.
Very reasonable.
But this taxi ride is where the psychological arc really begins. The best way to describe this first day is the feeling of cognitive dissonance.
How so?
Well, it's like your brain is trying to process two completely different realities occupying the same physical space. You look at the left side of the taxi and see a pristine, sparkling blue harbor.
Beautiful.
But then you look out the right side and you see brutal earthquake scars and unsealed, potholed roads. You see beautifully rebuilt, modern shop fronts sharing a wall with heavy construction hoardings. You look at the water again and there are massive industrial cranes towering over luxury cruise ships.
It is incredibly jarring at first.
And what the data shows is that almost every traveler experiences this exact arc. The sources map it out perfectly. It begins with raw uncertainty in the back of that taxi.
You're looking at the rubble, feeling the heat, seeing the unpolished edges of a recovering city.
And your internal monologue is probably asking, did I make a massive mistake coming here?
Right. You're thinking, did I just spend $3,000 to vacation in a construction site?
Exactly. But then The mechanism of Melanesian hospitality kicks in. You have your first genuine exchange with a local, maybe the taxi driver, maybe the person checking you into your room.
And the warmth here is legendary, and it's entirely unforced.
It immediately disarms that initial anxiety. And by the time you reach the end of that 24-hour arc, by the time the sun is setting, the heat has broken slightly, and you were sitting on the seawall with a cold, local Tusker beer in your hand.
Your entire nervous system has just downshifted.
The jarring dissonance is gone.
Yeah.
It's replaced by an understanding that you just have to surrender to the pace of the island.
You stop fighting the friction and just let it happen.
Exactly. So you've survived the arrival arc. You're sitting on the seawall, sipping your Tusker. The next logical question in our inspection report is, where are you sleeping tonight? And what is the literal financial damage?
The 2026 accommodation matrix.
Yes, this is where we get into the hard data. Our sources break this down into 5 highly specific traveler profiles.
And this matrix is invaluable because the pricing tells a story all on its own. It reflects a recovering economy trying to balance massive local inflation with the need to actually remain competitive for tourists.
So true. Let's start at the foundational level. The backpacker and digital nomad reality.
For the backpackers, there are genuinely solid options that haven't been priced out of existence yet. You have places like Tropicana Lagoon apartments.
Where's that?
It's located out near the Iririki Lagoon, about a 10-minute drive from the dusty downtown area. They offer dorm-style setups and self-catering studios starting at 7,500 Vanuatu a night. That's roughly $60.
That's pretty good.
Yeah, you get a basic kitchen, you get Wi-Fi. Another option closer to the city center is Coconut Palms Resort with budget rooms around 9,000 Vanuatu or $72. The sources describe it as dated but highly functional.
Okay, but we have to isolate the digital nomad subset of that demographic because the sources issue a hard, unequivocal warning here.
Oh, a massive red flag.
If you're a remote worker, Vanuatu looks like an absolute utopia on paper. You can spreadsheet a highly attractive monthly budget of around $2,400.
Now, if you're a remote worker listening to this, I know your ears just perked up. You're probably doing the math right now thinking you found the ultimate life hack.
$2.5 grand to live on a tropical island. It sounds unreal.
It is deeply tempting. That $2,400 budget breaks down very logically. $1,200 for rent on a self-catering studio, $720 for groceries and a few meals out, $200 for local transport, $65 for a massive mobile data package on the Digicel or Vodafone networks, and roughly $200 to rent a dedicated desk at the Hub co-working space in Port Vila.
It sounds perfect. It really does. So why is it a trap?
Because a spreadsheet cannot account for infrastructural friction. The reality of a post-earthquake grid is that it is fundamentally unstable. The power grid in Port Vila does not care about your Zoom schedule.
Oh, yeah.
You are going to face weekly unannounced power cuts. The internet infrastructure, while it has improved, will still drop out unexpectedly during high-load periods.
I mean, imagine trying to upload a massive video file for a client on a strict deadline, and the entire block just loses power for 4 hours.
Exactly. If your livelihood depends on seamless, high-speed connectivity and predictable infrastructure, the daily friction of this rebuild will rapidly turn your 3-month island dream into a high-stress nightmare.
So what's the advice?
The clear, uncompromising advice from the Logistics Guide is to reassess a long-term digital nomad stay in 2027 or 2028. Right now, in 2026, it is a phenomenal place to unplug for 3 weeks. It is an abysmal place to run a remote business for 3 months.
Consider yourselves warned, remote workers. Okay, let's move up the ladder to the mid-range sweet spot. This is where the bulk of traveling couples are going to land.
The mid-range market is really interesting here.
Yeah, you have places like Iririki Island Resort. This setup is incredibly cool. It's an entire private island resort, but it sits right in the harbor, just a free 3-minute ferry ride from downtown Port Vila.
So close, but totally separate.
Exactly. In the shoulder season, you can book an overwater-style bungalow there for about 22,000 Vanuatu, which is $175 a night. But remember the peak season pressure we talked about earlier?
So we go.
If you book that exact same room in August, the price jumps to 32,000 Vanuatu, or $255 a night.
It's a huge swing.
Yeah.
And if you want to escape the harbor entirely and look for something a bit quieter, there is the Havana on the north side of the island.
You mentioned they were fully rebuilt, right?
Yes, back online and recently refurbished. It's an adults-only property, widely considered one of the premier boutique resorts in the country. It anchors the higher end of the mid-range at around 38,000 Vanuatu, or $305 a night.
But what if you are bringing the kids? The family logistics profile is a totally different beast.
It really is. It requires a completely different type of infrastructure. For families, the source is heavily indexed towards self-contained resorts.
Like where?
The Warwick Lagoon Resort at Iririki Lagoon is the prime example. You can secure a two-bedroom bungalow there for 28,000 Vanuatu, roughly $220 a night. Crucially, for parents, it features dedicated kids' pools and sits on a very calm, protected lagoon beach.
Which mitigates the ocean risks, which is huge.
Exactly. Another strong option is Brecadies Beach Resort on the southeast coast, offering thatched roof bungalows right on the ocean frontage for 24,000 Vanuatu or $190 a night.
Okay, and then we have the final profile, the luxury contrarian play.
I love this one.
If you have serious capital to deploy and you want to completely remove yourself from the rebuild friction of the capital, you fly the Espiritu Santo archipelago and book Rotua Private Island.
Rotua is incredible.
It's a 146-acre private island. They literally took 13 antique 200-year-old wooden villas from Indonesia, dismantled them, shipped them across the Pacific, and rebuilt them on the beach.
That's insane.
It's completely off the grid, all-inclusive luxury, running anywhere from $780 to $1,400 a night.
Now, if we synthesize all of this pricing data across all 5 profiles, what is the underlying narrative here?
Honestly, when you look at the raw numbers, the narrative is how profoundly cheap it is compared to the rest of the global market right now.
Exactly. The mid-range tier is the undeniable sweet spot for Vanuatu in 2026. You are securing authentic Melanesian hospitality, gorgeous lagoon-front real estate, and you are doing it at roughly a 40% discount compared to a comparable week in Fiji or Hawaii.
You are actively trading infrastructural polish for significant financial leverage.
That's exactly it.
So you have your discounted lagoon bungalow. The next survival question is, how are you eating? This moves us out of the hotel and into the daily economics of food, finance, and culture.
And eating in Vanuatu, according to our sources, is cleanly divided into 3 distinct financial tiers.
And understanding these tiers is how you actually control your budget. So the top tier is the tourist tier, obviously.
Right. This is dining at the high-end resorts like the Havana or institutions in Port Vila like the famous French restaurant L'Oustale.
Oh, I've read about them. They've been serving wild pigeon and coconut crab for decades, right?
Yeah, it's a real institution. If you are eating at this tier, a main course is going to run you between 3,500 and 5,500 Vanuatu. That's about 28 to 44 US dollars a plate.
Okay, so standard resort prices.
Yep. The second tier is the mid-tier, which is where the everyday value really lives. Think of places like the Number One Cafe right on the Port Vila seafront.
What's the vibe there?
It's this great open-air pavilion where you can get incredibly fresh fish and chips for 1,800 Vanuatu, which is $14. A flat white coffee will run you about $3.50, and a substantial breakfast plate is around $12.
Super reasonable. But the third tier is the local tier. And this is where you actually taste the DNA of the country, and it costs almost nothing. We are talking about Mama's Market in the center of town.
Mama's Market is essential.
You basically bypass all the souvenir stands at the front and head straight to the food stalls at the back. Here, you order a massive plate of lap-lap.
We should definitely explain the mechanism of lap-lap because it is the culinary foundation of the nation.
Oh, it's incredible. Lap-lap is the national dish. It's not just a recipe, it's an entire process. They take starchy root vegetables, usually taro or yam, and grate them down into a thick paste.
Okay.
They soak that paste in rich, fresh coconut cream, maybe add some island cabbage or local pork, and then they wrap the entire mixture tightly in giant banana leaves.
But they don't put it in a normal oven.
No. They bury it in an underground stone oven covered with hot rocks and earth and let it bake for hours. The result is this dense, savory, pudding-like cake. And at Mama's Market, you can buy a massive filling portion of this for 400 Vanuatu.
400 Vanuatu, that is exactly $3.20.
It's unbeatable. You can also grab a plate of fresh, line-caught tuna sashimi for about $6 and hack open a fresh drinking coconut for $1.20.
And if your accommodation allows for self-catering, you will become very familiar with the anchor supermarkets.
LCM Supermarket on the Ligny Highway and Au Bon Marché.
Right. The logistics report gives us a fascinating rapid-fire look at the 2026 grocery reality. Like, a 1.5-liter bottle of water is 180 Vanuatu. A loaf of fresh bread is $3.50. A dozen eggs will cost you 600 Vanuatu.
Pretty standard prices.
But the real standout is the local produce. Vanuatu raises some of the best organic beef in the world under the coconut trees. You can get 500 grams of premium local beef for 1,200 Vanuatu, less than $10.
That's amazing.
A six-pack of the ubiquitous local Tusker beer is 1,400 Vatu, or $11, and you can walk out with a whole kilo of tropical fruit, papaya, mango, bananas for just over $3.
So the food is incredibly accessible, but buying that food and interacting with the locals who sell it requires an understanding of the cultural rules of engagement. You cannot just act like you're at a supermarket in Ohio.
No, you really can't.
This is where our deep dive gets into the concept of custom.
Custom is arguably the most important concept in the entire dossier. It is the traditional, unwritten body of law and belief systems that governs everyday life in Vanuatu. It dictates social hierarchy, land ownership, and interpersonal respect.
It's the foundation of everything.
Exactly. And while it is slightly diluted in the capital of Port Vila, the moment you step foot on an outer island like Tanna or Pentecost, custom is absolute law.
And the sources provide 3 very specific rules of custom that you, the traveler, must absolutely obey.
What's the first one?
Rule number 1. Never, ever photograph a person or a village without asking explicit permission first. This isn't just about politeness. In many deeply traditional villages, especially on Tanna, uninvited photography is seen as a severe violation of spiritual privacy.
It's taken very seriously.
Very. Rule number 2. Dress modestly. Resort wear belongs strictly inside the resort. If you are walking through a village or shopping at a local market, women should have their shoulders and knees covered, and men should wear shirts. Walking around town in a bikini top or board shorts is deeply offensive to the local modesty standards.
And the third rule revolves around the mechanics of money. Tipping is not customary in Melanesian culture.
Really? Not at all.
No. In fact, in many contexts, offering a direct tip can be actively uncomfortable because it disrupts the egalitarian nature of communal economics. It implies a hierarchy where none should exist.
So what do you do instead?
The culturally appropriate approach is to simply round up the bill. If your taxi ride is 1,300 Vatu, hand them 1,500 and tell them to keep the change. It is received as a gesture of communal goodwill rather than a transactional tip.
I love that nuance. It changes the entire dynamic from transaction to shared respect.
It really does.
And you absolutely cannot talk about custom without talking about the most famous cultural export of the entire South Pacific, kava.
Oh, kava.
But experiencing kava in Vanuatu is not like buying a trendy powdered supplement at a hipster health food store in Los Angeles. To experience kava, you go to a nakamal.
The nakamal is the traditional meeting place. It is the social and political hub of any village or neighborhood.
And around 5:00 p.m. every single day, you will see a red flag or a single-colored light bulb flick on outside these small, unassuming structures. That is the signal that the fresh kava root has been ground and the brew is ready.
It's sold by the shell, right?
Literally served in half of a hollowed-out coconut shell for between 150 and 250 Vatu.
The psychology of the nakamal is so fascinating when you contrast it with Western social drinking.
It is the ultimate anti-bar. I mean, think about the mechanics of a bar back home on a Friday night. People go in, they start drinking alcohol, and the energy ramps up.
The music gets louder, people start shouting over each other.
The social friction increases, and the environment becomes frantic. A nakamal operates in reverse. Kava is a powerful, naturally occurring, mild sedative and muscle relaxant. So you walk into the nakamal, you buy your shell.
And
You drink the entire thing in one long gulp because, let's be honest, it tastes exactly like peppery, muddy dishwater.
it does not taste good.
No. And then you go sit in the dim light.
And observe what happens to the environment around you.
Right. As the evening progresses and the kava takes effect, the nakamal actually gets quieter. The volume of the room drops. People start speaking in hushed, relaxed tones. The physical tension just melts away.
That seems incredible.
It is a profound communal ceremony of decompression at the end of the working day. You drink 2 shells, you go quiet, you listen to the cicadas, and the one hard, fast rule is that you never, ever mix kava with alcohol.
The nakamal perfectly encapsulates the rhythm of the country. It demands that you slow down. It forces you to adapt to its pace rather than attempting to impose your own frenetic Western urgency onto it.
That slow, deliberate pace is beautiful, but it completely clashes with the artificial urgency created by the dark side of our contractor's report.
No traps.
Because as authentic as Vanuatu is, every developing tourism economy has points of friction. When you're moving through Port Vila, there are highly specific pitfalls that can financially or logistically derail your entire trip if you aren't paying attention.
Our sources have synthesized the data into three major named traps that catch travelers off guard. And the first one is perhaps the most heartbreaking because it preys on the desire to see the country's greatest natural wonder.
That's a call?
It is called the Mt Yasur same-day lie.
Oof. Let's break down the mechanics of this trap. Mt Yasur, located on the southern island of Tanna, is one of the most accessible, continuously active volcanoes on the entire planet.
It's the crown jewel of Vanuatu tourism.
Absolutely. You can literally drive up the side of it, walk to the rim, and look straight down into a churning, exploding lava lake. So when you are walking down the main street in Port Vila, you will see tour agents advertising a same-day Mt Yasur experience for a flat rate of around $650 per person.
And the marketing copy implies a totally seamless adventure. Wake up in your Port Vila hotel, fly over to Tanna, stand next to the lava, fly back, and be asleep in your own bed that night.
It is an incredibly seductive pitch, but the brutal reality of the logistics completely shatters that promise. Let's look at the variables here. To get to Tanna, you must rely on an Air Vanuatu domestic flight. That schedule is notoriously thin, often running only 2 to 4 times a day.
Right. And then consider the destination itself. Mt Yasur is an active volcano. It emits massive amounts of volcanic ash depending on the internal pressure and the wind direction.
Which affects the planes.
Ash clouds on the flight path cause immediate, non-negotiable flight cancellations. Based on the 2026 data models in our sources, attempting to execute this exact itinerary as a same-day round trip fails roughly 20% of the time.
A 1 in 5 chance of catastrophic failure on a $650 excursion. Those are terrible odds. You either get stranded on Tanna with no accommodation booked, or you never make it off the tarmac in Port Vila and lose the money entirely.
So what is the logistical fix?
The mechanism to defeat this trap is time. You must build in a weather buffer. You cannot treat an active volcano like a tightly scheduled theme park ride.
Makes sense.
The sources dictate booking Tanna as a minimum 2-night, 3-day leg of your itinerary. You fly in, and you stay at a local operation like Tanna Evergreen Bungalows, which costs about 9,000 Vaatu a night.
Okay, so you build in extra days.
By doing this, you schedule at least 2 separate evenings to attempt the volcano ascent. If the wind direction is terrible on Tuesday and the ash is too heavy to safely approach the rim, you still have Wednesday as a backup. You absorb the friction through scheduling.
Brilliant. Okay, trap number 2 is purely economic, the cruise ship price double. We touched on the massive footprint of the 125 cruise ships earlier, but the way it warps the local microeconomy is just staggering.
It is a textbook example of extreme elastic supply and demand.
Exactly. Imagine a local vendor in Port Vila. For 5 days a week, foot traffic is pretty slow.
Huh?
But on Wednesday, a ship docks, and suddenly they have a 4-hour window where 3,000 people walk past their stall.
They know these day trippers have zero concept of the local baseline economy.
Right. So the prices magically inflate. A beautiful, locally carved wooden bowl or a pearl pendant that sits in a display case marked 3,500 Vaatu on a quiet Tuesday morning suddenly gets a new price tag of 7,500 Vaatu on a cruise ship Wednesday.
That's more than double.
A simple beach sarong goes from 1,500 to 3,000 Vaatu. And it's not just the markets. Even the established restaurants along the main cruise pier participate. A seafood platter that was legitimately priced at 3,500 Vaatu for lunch on Monday jumps to 7,000 Vaatu for the exact same plate of fish when the ship is in port.
It is aggressive dynamic pricing, and the only way to circumvent it is through basic intelligence gathering. As an independent traveler, you must check the port schedule at portphilacruise.com before you leave your hotel.
Such an easy fix, but so important.
You plan your high-end souvenir shopping exclusively for non-cruise days. Or, if you absolutely must shop on a busy day, you physically remove yourself from the blast radius of the pier.
Where do you go instead?
You walk past the seafront, up the hill to the handicraft market at the top of the Linney Highway. The vendors up there operate on a collective model, and the pricing remains flat, honest, and standardized year-round, regardless of who is in the harbor.
Trap number 3 is highly specific to the airport, but it is incredibly frustrating. It's the fake driving endorsement.
Oh, this one makes me so mad.
You land at Bowerfield Airport, you walk up to the rental car desk, exhausted from the flight. The agent looks at your home driver's license, shakes their head, and tells you that due to recent regulation changes, your license is no longer valid on its own.
They just make it up.
They demand an international driving permit. When you admit you don't have one, they generously offer to solve your problem by selling you a local driving endorsement document for an extra 4,000 Vaatu.
It is a complete desk-level shakedown. The legal reality in Vanuatu, clearly stated in the regulatory data, is that a standard national license from Australia, New Zealand, the UK, the US, or Canada is perfectly and legally sufficient for any stay under 30 days.
There is no new regulation.
None. To avoid this entirely, you politely but firmly refuse the upsell, present your valid national license, and critically, make sure you book your vehicles in advance with reputable international agencies like Avis or World Car Rentals. At those agencies, strict corporate policy prevents these local opportunistic scams.
And finally, there are a few petty scams to keep your radar up for. They aren't going to ruin your trip, but they are definitely annoying.
Like what?
Well, at the Tanna domestic airport, a guy might aggressively grab your bag off the cart, walk it the exact 30 meters to the check-in desk, and demand 2,000 Vanuatu for his porter service. The fix. Just don't let anyone touch your bag.
Fair enough.
Then there's the classic free Iririki Island tour. A friendly local near the ferry dock offers to show you around the island for free, talks to you for 10 minutes, walks you straight into their family craft shop, and heavily pressures you for a 5,000 Vanuatu exit donation.
That's such a classic hustle.
And if you are driving yourself and buying kava from a roadside shack on a known tourist route, check the price before they pour. They might try to upcharge you from the standard 150 Vanuatu to 800 Vanuatu simply because you are holding a camera.
These are annoyances, certainly, but they are entirely manageable if you possess the baseline awareness we're providing here. However, this brings us to a much more serious conversation. We need to look at the severe end of the spectrum.
Keeping your trip and your physical body intact.
Right. When people talk about safety in developing nations, the default assumption is almost always a fear of violent crime or getting mugged. But the expert synthesis of our sources presents a profoundly different reality here.
Vanuatu is statistically ranked in the safer half of the Pacific nations regarding violent crime.
However, it is absolutely not a sanitized, padded resort bubble.
Not at all. The real risk hierarchy in Vanuatu is overwhelmingly environmental, not malicious. The geography and the biology of the islands are the primary threats. At the very top of that risk hierarchy are natural hazards. We have already extensively covered the cyclones from November to April.
Right.
But you also have the ongoing seismic reality. In 2026, Ifade is still experiencing noticeable earthquake aftershocks. And intrinsically attached to both the cyclones and the earthquakes is the ever-present underlying tsunami risk. That is priority 1. You have to know where your evacuation routes are.
Priority 2 is biological. We are talking about dengue fever and other mosquito-borne illnesses. This isn't just about avoiding a few itchy bumps at a backyard barbecue. Dengue is serious. You have to treat tropical-strength insect repellent as a mandatory daily application, not an afterthought.
Priority 3 gets into marine biology, specifically unreefed stonefish and sea urchins.
The stonefish is a perfect example of an environmental hazard that catches tourists completely off guard. Let's explain the mechanism of a stonefish, because it is terrifying.
It really is.
It is one of the most venomous fish in the world, and it evolved to look exactly like a piece of dead coral or an encrusted rock. It just sits perfectly still in the shallow water. Along its spine are needle-like dorsal fins hooked up to venom glands.
So if you step on it,
If you're walking barefoot off an unmanaged beach and you step on one, the pressure of your foot injects the venom deep into your tissue. The pain is described as unimaginably excruciating, and it can cause tissue necrosis, paralysis, and heart failure.
wow.
Stepping on a stonefish doesn't just ruin your afternoon, it ends your trip and puts you in a hospital immediately. The logistical fix is simple. You must wear thick-soled reef shoes whenever you step into unmanaged ocean water.
And priority 4 on the risk hierarchy is road safety. Vanuatu operates on the right side of the road, but the physical infrastructure is perilous. Many of the rural roads, especially following the 2024 earthquake, are completely unsealed, heavily washed out by tropical rains, and lack basic guardrails.
You really need to focus when you drive.
The driving conditions require intense focus. Petty theft around the Port Vila markets only ranks 5th on the hierarchy.
So, given this environmental risk profile, how does the destination assess for different types of travelers? Like, for solo female travelers, the sources actually note it is a generally comfortable and welcoming destination.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, the overarching piece of advice is simply to exercise standard urban caution after dark. Avoid walking alone at night in specific unlit parts of Port Vila, like the stretches between the seaside and Friswata neighborhoods. Don't risk twisting an ankle in a pothole in the dark. Just spend the 150 Vanuatu and take a local minibus.
And interestingly, the sources emphasize that the outer islands, despite being more remote, actually feel dramatically safer and more communal than the capital.
For families, the risk assessment is highly age-dependent. If your children are 4 years old and up, it is a phenomenal destination. You base yourselves in a protected resort like Warwick La Lagoon, where the lagoon is calm, and they will have an incredible eye-opening experience.
But for families with infants or toddlers under 2 years old, the sources issue a hard, non-negotiable no.
And that leads to the most critical logistical question of the entire deep dive. Let's say the absolute worst happens. Someone steps on that stonefish. A traveler gets into a serious accident on one of those washed-out roads. Or a young child spikes a severe, unexplained fever. What is the actual protocol? What does the medical infrastructure look like in 2026?
The reality of the medical infrastructure is pretty stark, and it explains the warning for families with infants. Port Vila Central Hospital is staffed by dedicated professionals, and they are fully capable of handling basic emergencies, setting broken bones, and stabilizing a patient.
Okay, but what about the serious stuff?
For anything requiring advanced intervention, complex trauma surgery, severe pediatric emergencies, or major cardiac events, the local infrastructure simply does not have the capacity or the specialized equipment.
So what actually happens?
You require a medical evacuation. A specialized medevac flight must be dispatched to fly you out of Vanuatu and into a fully equipped first world medical facility, typically in Brisbane, Australia, or Noumea in New Caledonia.
That sounds incredibly expensive.
Organizing and executing a private international medevac flight costs tens of thousands of dollars. Therefore, the absolute most critical, uncompromising takeaway from this entire logistics brief is this. Comprehensive travel insurance with explicit high-limit medical evacuation cover is non-negotiable.
You literally cannot risk it.
Do not step on the plane without it. It is the ultimate safety net.
That is the sobering reality check of traveling in a recovering nation. And it brings us to the crucial weighing of the scales. We have to take everything we've discussed, the flight costs, the earthquake rubble, the stonefish risks, the scams, and weigh it against the stunning natural beauty.
We are looking at the highlights versus the heartbreaks. Is the friction actually worth it?
The contrast between the highs and the lows in Vanuatu is sharper than almost anywhere else in the Pacific region. Because when the highlights hit, they are genuinely, undeniably world-class.
Let's start with the highs, because they are the reason you go. The highest high, the apex experience, has to be Mt Yasur on Tanna. For an access fee of about $160, you get an experience that just defies logic.
I mean, we touched on it earlier, but paint the picture for us.
You take a rugged 4WD journey across a barren, lunar-like ash plain. You time the logistics, so you arrive at the crater rim just as the sun sets. The sky gets dark, and suddenly the glow of the magma takes over. You are standing on an unprotected ridge, staring down into an active lava fountain.
That sounds unreal.
The Earth is literally exploding in front of you. There is nowhere else on Earth where an average traveler can get that close to raw geological creation.
And then you contrast that fire with the water of Espiritu Santo. Champagne Beach, if you arrive at 7 a.m. before the cruise tenders drop anchor, is the absolute epitome of the pristine Pacific postcard. The water is crystalline and the sand is so impossibly fine it actually squeaks under your feet.
And for the diving community, Santo offers an unparalleled highlight: the wreck of the SS President Coolidge. Let's talk about the history here because it's wild.
Yeah, please do.
The Coolidge was originally a massive luxury American ocean liner. When World War II broke out, she was converted into a troop ship to ferry soldiers to the Pacific Theater. In 1942, she was heavily loaded with troops and equipment, trying to enter the harbor at Espiritu Santo.
Okay.
But due to a massive communication failure, she accidentally hit 2 friendly American mines that had been laid to protect the harbor. The captain managed to run her aground so almost all the troops could evacuate safely, but then the massive ship slipped backward and sank down a steep coral drop-off.
Oh, wow.
Today, she rests in water starting at just a 20-meter depth. It is considered one of the greatest accessible shipwreck dives on the planet. You can swim through the grand cargo holds and glide past rows of jeeps, trucks, and medical supplies that have been sitting frozen in time since 1942. It is literally an underwater museum.
Or if you aren't scuba certified, you can drive inland on Santo to the Nanda Blue Hole. For a 500 Vanuatu entry fee, about $4, you jump into a deep, natural freshwater cenote that is so vividly, intensely blue, it looks almost radioactive, but it's pure spring water filtered through limestone.
Those are the moments that validate the entire journey. They are transformative. But we must honestly weigh them against the heartbreaks, the disappointments that inevitably arise when traveling through a nation still in the grip of recovery.
And this goes right back to the core premise of our contractors report.
No.
Expectations versus reality. If you booked your 2026 trip based on a mood board of perfectly edited Instagram photos from 2019, you are going to experience crushing disappointment the moment you enter Port Vila.
Oh, for sure.
The heartbreak is seeing that the downtown seafront still heavily reads as an industrial construction site. The picturesque promenades you were promised are interrupted by chain-link fences and scaffolding.
Then you have the overcrowding reality. Places like the Mele Cascades, which is a stunning tiered waterfall near the city, if you go on a quiet Tuesday, it's magical. But if you miscalculate and go on a cruise ship day, it turns into a literal human traffic jam on a slippery rock face. The magic is instantly killed by the logistics.
There is also the heartbreak of the commodification of culture. The sources specifically highlight the authentic custom village tours at Ekasup near Port Vila.
What's the deal with those?
They charge tourists 4,500 Vanuatu for what is essentially a staged theatrical performance of village life. It feels highly choreographed and inauthentic, essentially a theme park version of Melanesia.
That's a huge bummer.
The heartbreak is paying that premium when you realize that if you had just traveled to an outer island like Tanna, you could experience the real, unstaged daily rhythm of village life simply by respectfully visiting and contributing a 1,000 Vanuatu donation to their community fund.
So how do we reconcile this? How do you mentally process standing next to a magnificent lava fountain one day and walking past earthquake rubble and staged tourist traps the next?
It ultimately comes down to a fundamental philosophy of travel. The disappointment only sets in if you arrive expecting a polished, finished consumer product. If you view travel as buying a guaranteed commodity, Vanuatu will frustrate you.
Exactly.
The experience that stays with you forever is the raw, untamed power of Yasur and the Coolidge. The thing that disappoints you is the realization that Port Vila is still in a gritty recovery phase, not a purely destination phase. But if you accept the reality of the rebuild before you board the plane, the friction stops being a disappointment and becomes an integral part of the texture of the journey.
Okay, let's say a listener has absorbed all of this, and they are thinking, you know what, dealing with power cuts, construction, and navigating cruise ship schedules sounds a bit too rugged for my vacation. Or, conversely, maybe they're thinking, I want something even wilder and less developed.
Where else should they look?
This brings us to the final comparisons. Vanuatu versus its two main Pacific competitors, Fiji and the Solomon Islands.
Let's start by looking east to the obvious Pacific giant, Fiji. Fiji is the direct, polished alternative. The infrastructural advantages are undeniable.
It's just so built out.
Nadi operates as a major international hub, making direct, frictionless flights from North America, Asia, and Europe significantly easier. Fiji possesses a massive, highly developed array of all-inclusive family resorts. The beaches and the main tourist zones are perfectly manicured, and you have guaranteed high-speed Wi-Fi across almost every property.
It is the easy button. But what is the downside?
The downside is the economic premium and the loss of edge. Fiji is expensive. The accommodation, the food, and the internal transport are going to run you anywhere from 30 to 50% more than what you would pay for a comparable standard in Vanuatu.
Because of that incredible infrastructure, it can also get incredibly overcrowded, especially in the highly marketed Mamanuca Island chain. And fundamentally, Fiji lacks that raw, edge-of-the-earth geological adventure. There is no Mt Yasur in Fiji. You go to Fiji if your primary goal is ultimate convenience, flawless service, and a guaranteed friction-free vacation.
Now, if we swing the pendulum in the exact opposite direction past Vanuatu, we look at the Solomon Islands, located directly to the north.
The Solomons are for the hardcore, uncompromising adventurer. It is significantly less developed than Vanuatu. The tourism footprint is minimal, making it exceptionally cheap for the independent traveler willing to rough it.
It's very raw.
The WWII history is even denser there, and the scuba diving at remote outposts like Munda and Jizo is arguably unmatched anywhere in the global tropics.
But the Solomons demand a massive logistical toll. The health infrastructure there is genuinely limited, far more compromised than even Vanuatu's. The inter-island flight connectivity is notoriously tough. Planes fly when they want to fly, and getting around requires immense elastic patience.
You choose the Solomons only if Vanuatu feels too accessible and too touristy.
You choose Vanuatu because it sits perfectly in the middle. It offers that rugged, authentic Pacific edge, but it still maintains a basic functioning safety net of direct international flights and a central hospital in the capital.
Which brings us to the ultimate synthesis. Based on the mountain of data we've unpacked, the flight economics, the seasonal cyclone risks, the rebuilding infrastructure, and the daily costs, we have the final definitive verdicts for our 5 specific traveler profiles.
All right, I am going to rapid fire these final verdicts based directly on the intelligence in our sources. Let's do it.
Starting with the backpacker.
The verdict for the backpacker is yes, but with conditions. It is only worth the investment if you are flying out of Sydney or Auckland and scoring a shoulder season airfare under $500 return. You need to base yourself at budget spots like Tropicana Lagoon, and you must eat the lap at Mama's Market to survive financially.
And you have to get out of the city.
Crucially, you must build your budget to include at least one domestic flight to an outer island like Tanna or Santo. If you get stuck in Port Vila trying to save cash, you will miss the magic of the country entirely. And if you are a North American backpacker looking at a $600+ connection through Fiji, the math breaks down. The logistics say go to Southeast Asia instead.
Next is the mid-range couple.
The verdict is a resounding yes. This demographic is the absolute sweet spot for 2026 Vanuatu. At roughly $174 per person per day at a place like Iririki Island Resort, you are buying overwater accommodation and authentic Melanesian culture at a massive 40% discount compared to Fiji. The earthquake rebuild is visible, absolutely, but it is not destination-breaking for this budget level.
The family traveler.
Yes, but with conditions. Base yourselves at a self-contained, heavily amenitized resort like Warhol Lagoon. Stick to the main island of Fate to minimize travel friction. Maybe execute one easy day trip to an outer island. Absolutely do not travel during the cyclone season.
And the age limit.
If your kids are under 2 years old, the lack of advanced pediatric medical infrastructure makes the risk profile too high. Push the trip back 2 years, or take the easy button and go to Fiji.
The luxury traveler.
Yes. Properties like Vanuatu Private Island and the Havana offer an incredible contrarian value play. For around $400 a day, you are accessing a genuinely remote, exclusive, barefoot luxury experience that the overcrowded luxury chains in Fiji simply cannot replicate anymore.
And finally, the digital nomad.
Hard no.
No.
The power cuts, the patchy internet underload, and the general friction of the rebuilding grid make this a terrible idea. It is a phenomenal place to unplug for 3 weeks, but it is not the place to run a remote, deadline-driven business for 3 months. Save your sanity and wait until 2027.
If we zoom out to the big picture here, executing a trip to Vanuatu in 2026 requires a highly specific mindset. It demands patience. It requires you to fully embrace the rugged, unpolished reality of a nation in the very midst of a post-earthquake recovery.
And above all, it requires a willingness to physically step outside the recovering capital city and explore the outer islands where the true heart of the country still beats.
It really is the contractor's report. The plumbing is still a bit shaky. The fresh paint is literally still drying on the shop fronts in the capital. But the foundation, the rich Melanesian culture, the exploding volcanoes, the WWII wrecks, the people, that foundation is stronger, more resilient, and more beautiful than ever.
And as we close this dossier, it leaves you with a profound philosophical question to mull over as you build your itinerary. When you travel to a country that is actively, painstakingly rebuilding its most basic infrastructure, where exactly is the line between being a logistical burden on their fragile systems versus being the essential economic fuel that funds their recovery?
Because as a traveler in 2026, you are not just a passive observer in Vanuatu. Every single Vatu you spend on a local Tusker beer, a plate of lap, a taxi ride from the airport, your dollars are actively laying the bricks of its future.
If this gave you the honest verdict you needed, follow the show. New episodes drop every day.
That is the honest verdict from Phil and H.